Aspettiamo ancora un minuto prima di cominciare, visto che stanno accedendo adesso tutti gli iscritti. E poi partiamo.
A me chiedono dove si trova il link per accedere. Qualcuno? Lo sapete? Loro che si sono iscritti dove trovano il link? L'avranno ricevuto?
Dovrebbero averlo
All'atto
ricevuto via
dell'iscrizione
mail.
e della registrazione online si riceve in automatico una confirmation email, una mail di conferma con il link. Se questo dovesse essere stato perso, le pregherei di scrivermi in chat il nome della persona e farò in modo di rimandarglielo in automatico appena mi comunicherà il nome.
Grazie.
Direi che a questo punto possiamo cominciare. Cominciamo puntuali come ci eravamo prefissati e innanzitutto buongiorno.
So we start. Good evening. It's a pleasure for me to introduce this webinar on behalf of the Courmayeur Foundation. Before starting, I wanted to thank all the accountants and all the lawyers from the courts of Aosta to make this event possible. It's the second time that the Courmayeur Foundation and the Italian Association of Collaborative Professionals organize a joint event on collaborative practice. The first event, it was held on the 28th of February 2020, right before the pandemic struck. After 2 years, we are repeating this experience. However, this second meeting is held in a different framework because the 21st of April is the World Day of Creativity and Innovation to foster the meeting of the 17 goals of the Agenda 2030 of the UN. They revolve around people, planet, peace, prosperity, and partnership. With the World Creativity and Innovation Week, we are finally realizing that the creative capital is the most precious asset that we have at our disposal. So today we are going to give more room to creativity and apply it to conflict resolution. As I said, 2 years went by from our previous meeting. In this period, many things have changed. Certainties that we used to have a couple of years ago are not there anymore. The environmental emergency, the pandemic, the economic and financial crisis, and this last war changed our priorities and our prospects for the future. We need to reinvent ourselves with creativity and courage. And we need also to reinvent our way to relate to conflict, whatever this way it may be. And we need even more to foster collaborative practice and alike instruments. It's not by chance that over the last 15 years, negotiation and mediation are very interesting for the academic world and also the professionals. Many works have been published in this sector. Studies and case studies have been carried out together with very original research. 15 years ago, there were few institutes offering courses on mediation or negotiations. Today, they are very common. Universities started to found faculties about mediation and negotiation, and the same happens in the business world. Today, to resolve conflict and disputes, and also to apply the rights of people, many of these different instruments are used. The alternative dispute resolution tools are now more used, and they are not used in the civil jurisdiction because litigation is held from bodies that are not the regular courts. So rather than suing the other parties, we can call the party before and arbitrate, and they will decide upon the dispute after a first attempt of reconciliation. There are also other alternative dispute resolution tools that are fostered even more by the legislator. I recall assisted negotiation, mediation, and the new role identified by the legislator of the business negotiator. All these alternative processes have two benefits. They are more accessible, cheaper, simpler, and faster than a regular trial. They also contribute to lessen the burden on the courts, because now trials in court are very, very much crowded. As I said earlier to the other speakers, I studied the collaborative practice, but I leave the word to them to describe collaborative practice in details. Every method can be judged according to 3 prerequisites, and they are leading to a reasonable agreement, if agreement is possible. The agreement has to be efficient, and it should also improve or at least not damage the relations between the parties. Collaborative practice is very specific, and it fulfills all these 3 prerequisites. Agreement is found by the parties, and it doesn't come from someone like a judge. Clearly, the professionals participating in the collaborative process cannot assist the parties in trial. And then there is a sharing and collaboration regarding the instruments and the tools. In addition, good faith and trust clauses are king, and there is not a delegation from the professional to, from the customer, from the client to the professional. But everyone involved collaborate to the final results. There is opening, there is not rigid positioning. So this led me to think that collaborative practice is not a tool for those who are deaf or pretend not to hear what happens around them. I think it's an instrument for an elite of people who would like and desire to listen to find a shared solution. And my last remark, there is nothing legal in what I'm about to say. Usually, assisted negotiation or mediation procedure, most of the procedures that I assisted to are gray, meaning that professionals would like to surrender before even starting the process. The system is complicated and not efficient. But here, as you will hear with your own ears, we have passionate professionals. They are involving, their eyes are sparkling when they talk about collaborative practice. And this is my personal remark, because I believe it's a very rare asset to find, and they have that extra mile to run, and this is something very valuable. So it's my pleasure to leave the floor to Marco Sala, the president of the Italian Association of Collaborative Professionals. Thank you. Thank you, Maurizio, and good evening, everybody. I would like to thank the Foundation, Courmayeur Foundation, that organized this event with us. It's a pleasure for me to greet you on behalf of the Italian Association of Collaborative Professionals. Today is the World Creativity and Innovation Day, the last day of the Creativity Week, organized by the UN and dedicated to innovation and creativity. This year, the main topic is collaboration. Today was celebrated by 126 countries in the world with different initiatives, and our association promoted 8 events out of 16 in the calendar in Italy. Today, the event is very important because we are going to speak about collaborative negotiation and the collaborative method. It's not just an alternative dispute resolution method. It's not just a set of principles and practices, but it's a system of value, first of all, a way of being in the world. Collaborative practice shares the 4 main values of the Creativity Week, that are collaboration, empathy, empowerment, and mentorship. In these hard times, with the war that is being fought in Europe, it's important to stress the value of collaboration. So I would like to end with a quotation by Harvey: in the long story of the animal and human world, those who collaborated and improvised it more effectively survived. So this is my message to you. It's important to put collaboration and creativity at the center of our thoughts and actions. So have good proceedings. Thank you, Marco. And I would like to start with our speakers. We welcome Daniela Stalla. She belongs to the lawyer bar of Turin. She has a long record, but she started with ADR tools and courses in 2010. She attended courses in Italy and the United States. She has been the past president and training of the Italian Association of Collaborative Professionals. So Daniela, please introduce the collaborative practice to us and correct what I said wrong. Thank you, and I leave the floor to you. Thank you, Maurizio. You didn't make any mistake, but you perfectly anticipated many of the topics that we are going to speak about today. The starting point I would like to make is very high and distant. My task is to say what it means to celebrate the World Creativity and Innovation Day and why we, the Italian Association of Collaborative Professionals, are here today to celebrate this event. The idea of creating a movement to foster creativity and innovation as instruments to improve the world and to improve sustainable development started in Canada in 2001 by the anthropologist Marcy Siegel. It can be seen as a utopian thought, but if we think about the evolution of the human being as a being that is able to learn and to evolve, we perfectly understand that improvements are always triggered by creativity, and it started by the founding elements like seeking for food and breeding animals and harvesting. And if we consider the great evolution like the discovery of space, great medical inventions and technological development, and I'm just saying a few of them, like the right of work, the rights of women, the abolition of the death penalty, they are all values that we consider as usual, but they didn't exist. And in some culture, they still do not exist. And they were triggered by creativity. It means that someone was able to respond out of the comfort zone, to think out of the box and find a different solution. And when these solutions are good, they are shared and they become common heritage of humanity. This is not something belonging to some genius people, but it belongs to all of us. The ability of adapting and to resolving conflict creatively can spring when people can share new ideas that can improve the life of man. Let's think about what we individually were able to do when facing the pandemics that struck us 2 years ago. Think about the many inventions and the regional adaptation strategies that we developed. 2 years ago, a meeting like this with more than 100 people from different sides of the city could not be possible. But the pandemics, among the negative effects, triggered in us the will of being together. So creativity can be developed if people are in a network and share innovative ideas to try and improve the world. That's why, starting from 2017, the World Creativity and International Day has been celebrated by the UN. This is an approach that can allow to share, to meet the goals of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that the UN countries set as the Agenda 2030. These are ambitious and crucial goals that move along the social, economic, and environmental orientations. But we have the perception that the world needs us. Humanity needs a shared effort to make a step forward in a moment that is very difficult. We need to face problems. We need to try and find sustainable solution. That means I think not only for our generation, but also with the next generations in mind. I started from this wide topic. And now I would like to go to the specifics. Why are we talking about collaborative practice today? The World Creativity and Innovation Week this year is dedicated to collaboration. That's why we, as the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals, was asked to share what is the collaborative method. This is a useful method to meet the goal number 16 that talks about peace, justice, and accountable institutions. We are talking about collaborative practice today because this is a clear example of creative approach to problem resolution. Promoting collaborative practice are lawyers. Isn't it creative, a lawyer that is not litigious? Lawyers are the archetypes of litigation, but they change radically their attitude, starting with a collaborative approach rather than an opponential one. The collaborative approach does not only belong to professionals working with conflict or in the legal world. There is a collaborative culture in different sectors. There is collaborative design, collaborative management, collaborative workplace, collaborative approach to the urban sector, collaborative approach between doctors and patients. But what does it mean? Because it means generically actively participating to an intellectual effort. Not really. When we talk about collaborative approach, we have in mind a specific methodology with some common elements that I'm going to share with you briefly. Here, the crucial principles of the collaborative practice. First of all, we need a shared method. So, the same training. We need to involve all the individuals and go beyond hierarchy. The client is not subject to the instruction of the lawyer, but the client brings its knowledge to the table because he knows the situation, so he's going to sit at the table together with the others. The same will apply to the patient with the doctor. Knowledge will be joined. Active listening, it's a crucial principle. It means to listen to understand what the other people are saying and not to respond. Then we have trust and transparency to solve the problems, problem solving and brainstorming. That means to create a range of possible solutions that can capture all the needs of all the stakeholders so that we find sustainable solutions. So there is not a winner and a loser, but everybody will win. We need to work together with shared goals of being helpful and create a sustainable approach that is also socially useful for a more serene and improved relationship. Today, more than ever, with a war at the door of Europe, we need a different approach. And to promote a different approach, it's very important. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Daniela, for your thoughts. And thank you for taking our hands and accompanying us through the meaning of collaborative practice by describing collaboration at 360 degrees, including at international level. With a great human touch, you were able to paint a white picture and to describe all the skills and competencies revolving around collaborative practice. Once more, you led us to understand that specific knowledge without understanding the big picture is not as useful. As past president of the Association of Collaborative Professionals, I have a question for you. How could you network with the other colleagues? What is the evolution of the association? How could you do that? We have two elements. We have trust in this method. We are a very wide group and we are advocating this method. Volunteering is one of the keys in our approach. Is the organization of practice groups. We meet locally every month to discuss in details the topics of the collaborative practice, because the shift from adversarial approach to collaborative approach requires experience and experimentation. Meeting in groups, we can create a network of professionals working together, because we have different professions, but we are building a common language. And the common language is the main foundation allowing to work in a sustainable way. Thank you for your clear answer. Now we are sharing today. We are leaving the floor to Barbara Bassino she is an accountant and she also is a psychologist and a therapist. So she is having the heart and mind meeting. She's a trainer in the Italian Association of Collaborative Professionals. So we leave the floor to Barbara Bassino to talk about the conflict, because you will have your point of view.
Thank you very much, Maurizio. Thank you, everyone. Good evening. And I feel particularly honored to participate as a speaker to this prestigious conference promoted by the Courmayeur Foundation and the Italian Association of Collaborative Professionals, together with the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals. So tonight we have the aim of offering a reflection on the collaborative civil society, on the change of pace that we feel necessary, and on the indispensable role of the professions within this scenario. My role today and my comment is to offer you some considerations on the precursor of any collaborative processes, that is to say, conflict. Conflict is an inescapable feature of living systems. The world, cities, our working environment around us, our family, our partners, our neighbors, we're always actors on the stage of a conflict, which changes continuously. It changes in its appearance. And again, if these were not scary enough, psychoanalysis teaches us that conflict is born with us and within us. We find ourselves, therefore, living with feelings of dissatisfaction, disillusionment, ambivalence, deep uncertainty, continuous revision of our categories. And having said that, if conflicts are outside of us, but they're also within us, what are the presuppositions thanks to which we think we can ignore them, and at what price. Conflict is an inescapable part of the relational dynamics. And while it is true that each person has his or own personal relationship with it, it is also true that many people recognize themselves in their inability to stand in conflictual tensions, and therefore they support this illusion that one can feel much better by implementing avoidance logic. And the reasons why we believe this are biological and can be explained through neuroscience. Our mind constantly searches for homeostasis. We look for tranquility, allowing us to be calm and balanced. So every turbulence, every conflict, every issue pertaining to this initial tranquility activate our mind, pushing it towards finding other conflicts and solutions to them. So this constant activation is something that is exhausting. That is why our mind doesn't like conflict. However, there is also something that we repress underlying this issue, and it pertains to our archetypes. So fear of violence. Violence terrifies us, leaves us helpless, and in the grip of deepest anxieties. For example, we can think about what's going on in the world nowadays and the way it impacts us and leaves us helpless, as we said. This is when the human mind resorts to a dangerous stereotype when thinking about those issues. That is to say, that calm, that flat superficies of the lake, if you will, that flat water, well, nothing can presuppose or that violence exists. Or this is what we see in the news when something terrible happens, when the neighbors are interviewed, and generally they say, well, really, I would have never expected it. I'm speechless. That was such a calm person. Violence is not a consequence of tension. So this is an underlying error, ideologically speaking. Violence, like war, is a consequence of the inability to manage tension, which is connected to living beings, because we can't avoid it. It is a denial of the conflict itself, whereas finding a solution to conflict has a strong evolutionary element. So, and the logic of eliminating differences rather than managing them. So something completely different. And how do we get out of this? Well, social sciences help us out, conveying a little bit of optimism here, because conflict is something useful and can't be done without. As our colleague SALA said, creativity makes us move forward. This elan is just an initial conflict that we can manage and make evolve into something different. True, conflict has always allowed us to find new solutions, a new form of balance. So it is illusory to think that conflict should be suppressed. That's wrong. Conflict should not be suppressed, it should be managed. Considering common sense, there are substantially two ways to approach it: attack or defense. And again, we have to think of the tragedy that we see those days. But collaborative practice states something different. There is a third way to get to the bottom of the conflict, that is to overcome the adversarial mode. And I was speaking with a colleague of mine who is not here today, and a couple of days ago, and she was saying that defense, it can only be defined as such if it's for everyone. Maybe defense is not collaboration oriented. However, we should think that what we put forth is okay for the others as well. Collaborative practices are about this. There is a shift considering those granitic and rock solid positions to find a new solution. So the change of pace is enormous. So managing a conflict means rolling up one's sleeves as a team of professionals, making up this team that we talked about, and everybody else involved in this, because otherwise this negotiation wouldn't be possible. So rolling up one's sleeves, plunging one's hands into this dangerous of conflict and trying to find a solution all together with something that can be slightly improving, which can be okay for the two parties that are the protagonists of this conflict. So in other words, and coming to the end of my intervention, no conflict will ever be solved unless both sides are given the chance together with all the parties to an extended conflict, there may be many, to come out of it with something more than in the beginning. So unless a way is found to disengage from their logic of mere position, it can't be possible. Not now, not for the future. So when it comes to conflicts or even to a war, a settlement can't be entrusted to the parties involved because they lack lucidity, a forward-looking vision, real expertise, and skills. So I have a slide that I want to share with you. As I was saying, the parties to the conflict lack this clear approach. We need somebody who can have a broader vision on the conflict with a wide-angle lens, somebody who is recognized, an authoritative guarantor of transparency and respect for the rules. So an expert, that is to say, a professional oriented towards settlement, negotiation, and collaboration, a professional who is collaborative, that was trained accordingly. Thank you very much. Thank you, Barbara, because with your multiple skills, you allowed us to get deeper into conflicts and thus understand the importance of managing conflicts and how suppressing it is a way that we can't consider. I like the vision of rolling up one's sleeves and getting to work hands-on. This is something that we as professionals don't really take into account, but those issues should become more familiar to us. One question: how can we become more familiar with this collaborative practice? What can we do to get closer to your association? You organize meetings or training sessions. Of course, the Italian Association of Collaborative Professionals organizes twice a year at least some basis classes as an introduction, 4 days each, and they are very nice and cross-professional classes, considering all the jobs that are here represented. we learn to speak the same language. We are different professionals speaking the same language. And during those classes, well, the next will be in Apulia in the end of May, the next one in Courmayeur, and will be hosted by the Courmayeur Foundation, September the 12th and 13th, 19th and 20th. And another event to introduce those classes on Saturday, the 20th of May, to showcase this collaborative practice. And I hope we will intrigue you enough to bring you on board. We need everyone in our association. Thank you very much. Great, thank you for these pieces of information and the passion that you show. And I will now leave the floor to Dr. Silvia Cornaglia, who is a lawyer, an accountant, sorry, and a trainer. She is also the author of a number of articles and publications on the topic of collaborative practice, and she is also an Italian Association of Collaborative Professional Trainers, and she will talk about the collaborative approach to dealing with conflicts with some general principles related to fairness, good faith and transparency. Thank you very much, Silvia, over to you. I can't see Silvia right now. Still don't see her. She had a problem. Oh, there she is. Great. I managed to solve my problem. As I was saying, just a couple of remarks after hearing the colleagues. First of all, the need and the convenience to develop some shared competencies and skills to settle conflicts. As Dr. Bassino was saying before me, conflicts can be managed and can be transformed into something that hurts less. I like the word disentangle. Why so? Because conflicts are bundles, and maybe at the elementary school, you know, they made us take part in those workshops in which we needed to learn crochet, but instead of knitting, I would always take care of disentangling those bundles. Anyway, sorry, I can hear some noises in the background. Anyway, this idea of a tangle and of disentangling speaks to me. Why so? Because the ends of a thread are close to one another, but they're also separated by a number of knots that need to be disentangled, and they can be very big. Or so the objective is to get rid of those knots whilst not breaking the thread. I like a sentence that SALA used. So when I think about this metaphor, is disentangling knots while taking care of threads. So those two ends are the parties to the conflict, and the thread is what still connects them in a different way, even though they're distant from one another. What can work this way? Common business, children, common friends. So this simile resonates with me, and I'm thinking about how we can disentangle something. So we No, Alexander the Great and the legend stating how he used the sword because he wanted to be an emperor in the Asian region in which he lived. So the result was reached, but those two ends were separated forever, leaving fragments shredded on the floor, now to be put together again. Whereas in collaborative practices, there is this idea of keeping this thread. Maybe this will be useless, but there is something that can be utilized in the future when plans converge. Another element that comes to mind that may not have anything to do but still resonates with me is at the end of the Aeneid, Priamus begs to have the body of his son back. So this is a different way to deal with conflicts because it has to do with our need for a family, for a homeland. So that is to say that there are different ways to open up new paths to settle a conflict. So we're talking about Achilles here with Priamus. Is an example, but more often than not, this doesn't happen because the parties to the conflict need to be helped. And this is what happens through collaborative negotiation, helping the parties to settle their conflicts. Anyway, collaborative negotiation can happen at a number of levels with different intensities depending on the context. We are speakers here supporting this practice, which is a method within the method, a non-adversarial approach through a number of steps and tools, creating it. So this method relies on a few principles that can be applied in a greater context, on a wider context of conflict, or can be utilized also to make more collaborative negotiations in general. Those principles are a few, and I'm going to briefly touch upon good faith, transparency, and correctness, whereas Cristina Mordiglia will deal with something else. For example, confidentiality and other characteristics pertaining to collaborative practices. In terms of good faith and fairness, well, this is something that can be found in all the codes of ethics for the jobs represented by the professionals here. So, for example, avoiding practices that only go to the advantage of one party. Not always are professionals that attentive, but anyway, our negotiations are part of trials or other types of processes. Good faith and fairness have to do with the fact that we have to go see a judge. So we would like to be in a strong position because we want to show our clients that we are strong. So those are general principles. However, they are interpreted and can be interpreted. Whereas in our case, we should forget about the trials, knowing that for all the parties, this can be of advantage. Transparency, maybe we need to articulate this a little bit better, because in negotiation and in collaborative negotiations, we must share all pieces of information that may impact or influence the decisions taken by the counterparties. So in this case, there is an absolute disclosure, but we also have to remember that the matrix here is American, and in the legal framework there, transparency is taken for granted. So in this case, we're talking about disclosure, whereas we can omit some pieces of information and sometimes even lie. This determines different issues vis-a-vis the areas where the collaborative practices were created. We can omit some information or convey something which is not correct, and this is to protect the parties to a trial. However, this possibility was consolidated in a context in which negotiations may end up in a real trial in court. So, to talk about disclosure here, well, something about it was written only with the Rokoff Commission, and since this reform hasn't been fully applied yet, however, Dr. Baudino will talk about it. Legislative Decree 118 of 2020. It foresees disclosure as an obligation to the creditor. We're talking here about bankruptcy law. Act 3 of 2012 again pertaining to procedures to solve excessive debts, defining behaviors, for example, that are characterized by a full collaboration, so disclosure of the information to be provided. A couple of words about collaborative practices and its characteristics. Well, it is about the settlement of family issues. So it was actually set up by the Minnesota lawyer Stuart Webb, so a family lawyer who had experienced the magic of this synergy amongst professionals that led to creative solutions that were not foreseen in a highly satisfactory way. Instead of going down a more frustrating pathway. So he defined this practice as in a different way, so something deliberate. So he created a community of lawyers sharing this viewpoint, and over time this collective work put forth by professionals following him led to enriching this method through a broadening of the team with other experts experts, and on the other hand, through common training of all the people involved in the settlement of those conflicts. There are some facilitators for communication, a professional of relationships supporting the parties, but also a financial professional. When we talk about families, a method was applied pertaining to an expert of the evolutionary age stages to disentangle this conflict. And we have an urban planner, for example, here with us, sharing a different perspective. Professionals, what do? They accompany the parties in their journey towards a common goal. And I hereby close my intervention. The collaborative practices were created in a family-related setting. However, it can be applied to a number of contexts. In particular, it has been studied in a business setting or in a contractual setting, or the definition of contract in succession law, which is also important to limit the risk of conflicts. That may limit the possibilities of a good outcome in business relationships. And I hereby come to the end of my intervention. Should we have the chance to further deepen a few points, we'll go back to them. Another aspect, another thing that I wanted to underline is the importance of teamwork. I quoted a few professionals, as Daniela Stalla said. They are part of this team, but the parties need further knowledge to overcome what they can't solve on their own. Having said that, I will leave the floor to the following speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Silvia. You explained the main principle of collaborative practice, especially the good faith and disclosure. They are very well known and very important for all the lawyers and litigators. These are general clauses, of course, and the content must be added. When you were speaking, I was wondering if these principles are violated by some of the parties. What are the instruments that we can use? Is there a sanction? Is there something that we can do to counter this type of behavior that does not meet the proceeding? Collaborative practice always starts with an agreement, that is a participation agreement. There are professionals and parties engage in observing all the principles. All the professionals sitting at the table respect all these principles. So not only lawyers and clients together, but all the people overall participating in the practice. So of course we don't have the time to go into the details now here, but there is a lawyer for each of the parties and also some neutral professionals that are involved in the practice. So the lawyers have to comply with these principles. So if a violation occurs, they should work with the party to lead them back to the right track. So to comply with the principles that were underwritten when making the participation agreement. So the lawyers, but all the other people, and Ms. Mordiglia will confirm. So the lawyers are committed to interrupt the collaborative practice if the principles are violated, including the disclosure. And of course, we need to take into consideration the context each time and the applicability, but the lawyer is a guarantor of the behavior of all the parties. So if these principles are not respected, the practice will be interrupted. The reason for interruption should not be disclosed because there is secrecy to respect, but we can interrupt the practice. Then, if professionals follow these principles, of course, they will assess the possibility of interrupting the process or not if some principles are violated. It's very interesting to hear that there is room for creativity here and also in creating the future of the relationship. It sounds like the civil law is at the heart and the private independence is at the heart of the process. So here the process deals with family law, but then the agreements are regular contracts. So private independence and autonomy can find room in the relationships here at stake, and it's the leading light to follow. So the parties will be those to create and mold the relationship. Now, we give the floor to Cristina Mordiglia, lawyer, civil lawyer in Milan. She deals mainly with family law. And over the last 10 years, she's implementing the collaborative practice in mediation, family law, collaborative mediation. She wrote different works, sometimes with co-authoring some works. She translated one of the most important books by Nancy Cameron on the collaborative practice. So collaborative practice, deeper dialogue by Moderator, with the other authors that are here in this webinar. She dealt with the collaborative practice in the book. She is a trainer at the Italian Association of Collaborative Professionals, and she's sharing the principles that Silvia Cornaglia described so far. But Ms. Mordiglia will speak about limited mandate. And I will be very brief. Thank you, Maurizio. This is not a training course, so I would like to stress the meaning of confidentiality and limited practice. It means that we need to create a safe place in collaborative practice where the parties can express themselves and say everything they need to, even the secret parts of the conflict, being safe and feeling secure. It's like a trusted room where professionals and parties can freely operate, facing also topics that were not mentioned earlier. They can even help the parties to communicate with each other. This means that the mandate should be limited. This is an approach that creates a lot of fears in untrained lawyers, because the lawyer is committed to accompany the parties to find an agreement. If agreement is not found for any reason, the lawyer commits to not accompany the client in court. This is a strength of collaborative practice, because in this trusted room, you can freely operate without any problem in the future of saying things that may be harmful to the other parties. Professionals are the guarantor of the collaborative practice in all respects, because the lawyers will be those leading the parties to comply with the principles. Collaborative training is very useful also in different situations and environments, including collaborative negotiations and negotiations with, let's say, traditional lawyers, because we have a set of tools that can help and lead the other party to find innovative and original ways to operate. Trained collaborative lawyers have a different approach to conflict, and in this approach, they can operate also when you're not in collaborative practice, because you can use the same tools in different situations. I believe that a collaborative training can be useful to many other professionals. It's an approach providing skills, empathy, listening abilities, and we should speak very largely about the listening. We tend to listen to reply rather than listen to understand. We usually listen in order to take elements to corroborate our message and our reasoning. My message to you is that we can learn to collaborate. First of all, we need to work on ourselves. We need to accept to work outside our comfort zone. We were trained to work in our comfort zone, and we studied and got our degrees in the past. And we were trained like that. But today at university, there are courses on alternative dispute resolution tools. But when we were trained, we had a different approach to listen to the customer to win in trial. This collaborative approach leads us outside our comfort zone. And so we are not at ease anymore. And I would like to share a slide that is really very dear to me. And in fact, it represents the journey of the collaborative professionals when working in his room at his desk, is not satisfied to the win-win approach. And the professional has to meet the challenge of finding new ways. Here, we are proposing a new way. and we are very enthusiastic about it. In fact, the collaborative community in Italy is very large and developed, and we are ready to welcome all the professionals that want to join us by attending training. It's a very important shift. We need to work on ourselves first to change the attitude, tending to be closed in our rooms and in ourselves. We need to be ready to share. We need to be ready to work in a team. We need to be ready to have a joint training. We, as collaborative professionals, meet every year. We used to attend world forums in Canada or the United States to learn about this shift. And you feel at a certain point, you feel that it's difficult to leave your first approach, and it's difficult to take on the new approach. It's difficult to transform yourself. And you keep on acquiring new tools and instruments. But it's a process that continues. It opens your mind to keep on observing reality around you with a different set of eyes. We learn to be ready to meet the challenge, to get out our comfort zone. We have less and less comfort. We need to be ready to be again in the game. We need to have a new mindset to review our knowledge and the relationship between knowledge and action. This is the reflective practitioner of Don Schoen. We need to continuously work and put our hands on the topic. We cannot continue to accept the conflict from a client and try to resolve it. We need to work by creating, by empowering the client, by giving the ability to the parties to contribute to the process. We need to give the parties the ability to understand what's happening to them and to be the actors and the players to the transformation. The idea is that collaborative practice has to be cross-practice that we can extend to different scopes of knowledge. This is my message to you today with the following relationship. You will see that we can spread it to different professions. In fact, we will have also the urban development, and we could be open to new ways of sharing collaborative training. Knowledge involved are linked together by an energy, by a shared attention that is the ability of focusing and committing on an equal level. This is an important shift comparing to the traditional training. Collaborative knowledge merge and improve. There is not a hierarchy, there is not a mandate. We always work together. There is common intention, meaning a common goal that is as diverse as the people involved. So we can apply collaborative practice to many sectors, not only to family law. And this is what we are already trying to do. And we are already having successful outcomes in this respect. So the idea is to keep on listening to each other and sharing our training. I would like to share another slide that is the intentional practice. Training is not very well known at the beginning, so we are unaware, and I'm not only talking about lawyers, but all professionals, and it can be aware competence when we realize that it is possible to have a different approach. Then there is aware competence when we are trained, and it cannot become unaware in the future. So the collaborative professional cannot move on automatically, like the values are already learned. It has always to be an intentional process. The professional has to continue to listen, has to continue listening, be open to the other knowledge. We need to be in the 2 steps of the intentional practice. In this way, we will be open to creativity, that is the soul of the change, and it allows us to, it enables us to meet the unpredictable, to find a way out in a conflict situation. And I would like to quote Kennedy, don't ask yourself what your creativity can do for you, but ask yourself what you can do for your creativity. Because we have creativity inside us. We need only to develop it and to work on it. As it happens in collaborative practice, we need to train our creativity and implement it to the different situations. Sometimes we fear to show what we are. Our insecurity and our fear cancel our creativity, but we have a very strong creative power inside us. And this is our message. We need to unleash our creative power. We, with our professional skills, need to contribute to the process together with the other professionals in the game. This can expand to other sectors. We should not need to prevail, but we need to continue be attentive and curious and understand what we can give to ourselves and to others. Collaborative power is a process that feeds the improvement of society. We start from family because this is the place where the collaborative practice started, but it can be spread to other fields in the society, and this is our aspiration. I leave the floor to the other people. I would really love to answer to some questions that I saw coming. Thank you. Thank you, Cristina, for introducing us to the other principles of collaborative practice. I was always taught not to show my cards to the opponents as a lawyer, so I can understand how traditional lawyers can be reluctant to share all information and to turn all the cards in front of the other parties. So I can understand that is a leap in the dark for a traditional lawyer. So I've got a question for you. What happens if your client would like to continue with collaborative practice, but the lawyer of the other parties is not trained as a collaborative lawyer? Did it happen to you? It happens very frequently because there are not many trained professionals. In addition, the idea of collaborative practice starts when the other parties are not assisted by a collaborative lawyer. In this case, you cannot use collaborative practice, so you can if you would like to start with collaborative practice, you should start by telling the other parties to have a collaborative lawyer. Otherwise, you cannot proceed in that respect. So I leave the floor to Alessandro Baudino. He's a lawyer at the Court of Torino. He is trained on international litigation. He has different courses in the US. And he deals with collaborative practice.
Nel senso che è relatore a diversi convegni, è docente in corsi di formazione sui principi della pratica collaborativa. Stasera, proprio vista la sua specializzazione.
So tonight, considering his specialty, he will talk to us about collaborative practices applied to a specific sector, that is business law. Thank you very much, Maurizio, for this introduction. Thank you for defining us as enthusiasts. And I hope that I'll be able to convey this enthusiasm as well as convince you to become part of this process. So to start with what happened in the beginning of this path, I would like to start with some history. I have a white beard, so this gave me the chance, or has given me the chance, to see the evolution of the discipline as far as business law is concerned. As Maurizio was saying, we dealt with some alternative procedures to settle a crisis, and this is characterized by a deeper understanding of the social dimension of conflicts. So conflicts are not a problem that can be created and resolved by the single parties, because it has a deeper impact onto the context of reference. And we see that when we consider business contracts and business conflicts and business crises, that is the field in which we try and foster collaborative negotiation. Because in those two areas, the attention of the lawmaker to the problems of conflict settlement is relatively young, and is connected to an evolution in terms of attention that was a focus shifted from the shareholder value to the protection of stakeholder value. So it's been 50 years since Mr. Friedman on the New York Times magazine wrote that a good manager is what makes the most in terms of yield of the investment and return of investment. So today, this concept of a business generating profit was changed to prefer social responsibility, so which is the very basis for sustainability and sustainable development as well, which is a presupposition for continuity of businesses as an entity creating value in terms of occupation, in terms of tax amounts for stakeholders that benefit from business activities. We are all aware of the acronym ESG, environmental social governance, identifying the risk factors that responsible management of a business must take into account to create value in a durable way, orienting therefore any business decisions towards objectives that are not just lucrative but are long-term ones, taking into account the factors and impacts onto the social context of reference. So risk of conflict and risk for crises have to do with the factors defined as governance risks. Therefore, the way and the capacity of an enterprise to face those risk factors, which is absolutely essential in terms of assessment of the sustainability of any businesses, but also in terms of investors' interests, access to EU funds, and negotiation, and in particular, collaborative negotiation is the most sophisticated and useful tool that we have to face conflicts, considering those aspects of sustainability. So the situation that we're living is, of course, dramatic. The pandemic and the problems, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, all those aspects have determined a situation of instability that has us renegotiate contracts that have been strongly impacted on by events that were totally unforeseen and unforeseeable. So, if we see this context from a perspective of an analysis, an economical analysis of right and law, so the norms that are at our disposal are not adequate, and we see that in all the decrees that have been put in force, because we're running after a context that is ever changing, and it's therefore subject to financial and economic relationships that can be impacted on in an unforeseen way. So from a substantial viewpoint of law, we see the inadequacy of the tools at our disposal. That is to say, excessive tax, for example, to renegotiate relationships that have been impacted on by these exceptional events that must be protected anyway, because business law foresees some rules that are inadequate when you want to terminate a contract, and the same inadequacy can be seen when we talk about trial tools, for example, judicial remedies leading to a decision by a judge deciding who is right and who is wrong is absolutely inadequate vis-a-vis the wished outcomes, that is to say, supporting this relationship. So the final goal is to safeguard a complex financial project. So these are long-term contracts to protect this common project. However, the devastating consequences of those remedies can be seen in a business context within an enterprise. As professionals, we know how, in many cases, businesses that are thriving lost money and went bankrupt after conflicts amongst directors or directors and shareholders. So going to a judge was inadequate in those cases, also because trials are extremely long. So it can't be settled anymore. And it only touches the tip of the iceberg, leaving completely unattended what lies under the water. We know that the tools that can be used, that is to say, to solve a crisis before it gets any worse, have always been the beginning of failure, or in this case, bankruptcy. So the need at EU and national level is to foster alternative instruments allowing for a settlement of those conflicts through negotiation. However, the real key to change here was the association to negotiation of an obligation of discussion. So this collaborative practice was quoted as an example, and the principle of collaboration was followed by assisted negotiation that has already been quoted, and in the setting of enterprise crisis that was introduced based on the insolvency directive of 2019, that takes up some European Law Institute's remarks that spurred European nations so that they would introduce principles and instruments of negotiation for contracts impacted on by the effects of the pandemic and of the crisis. So in our legal framework at the EU and national level, we have two funding acts which have a general character and, however, can be applied directly, allowing for full legal dignity for this obligation to negotiation in terms of collaboration. What does that mean? Article 2 of the Italian Constitution and of Article 2 of the Founding Treaty of the European Union anchor the the principle of solidarity, collaboration in good faith and fairness is, sorry, a declination of all of this. So the use of those principles allows to state that even though there is no contractual forecast for what we call hardship clauses applied in international contracts, good faith and fairness deriving from those contexts impose to the parties that they must behave that way to rebalance the contracts that were impacted on
by the unforeseen effects like the pandemics or the sanctions and limitations that arose from the war between Russia and Ukraine. In the collaborative practice, we see a required adaptation of the contracts affected by the external events. If we would like to use a metaphor, a picture, so collaboration is the starting point, but also the destination of negotiation, meaning that it can be regarded as a starting point because collaboration implies that the parties need to collaborate to find a shared solution. So it offers more guarantees for a collaborative outcome. It is also a destination, though, because the overcoming the devastating effect of the conflict on the society enables to retrieve solidarity and collaboration that are at the foundation of the economic and social growth of the country. So this allows to create wider and more interesting and stimulating situations where the tool of collaboration can play a pivotal role in triggering and consolidating the values that were endangered by the external events as we are seeing in our reality right now. So if we would like to go back to the title of our speech today, we can see that the principle and the practices of collaboration are to have a pivotal role to overcome the fragility of these dramatic events like the conflict. And the conflict can be transformed in an opportunity in this way. It can happen if the professionals involved that will deal with the conflict will be able also to make a shift in their mindset, which is required to join the negotiation table by collaborating on a method and speaking the same language. There can be no collaboration without sharing. What is required is that those who are used to adversarial logics can be willing to change approach and meet this challenge. But this is not only a challenge, it's a great opportunity because it's also a way, an opportunity, as I said, to have a new social role in the profession and to become an active and driving force in leading towards solution in conflict situations like those we are living now. And there are also situations that make companies, that make the life of companies difficult. So ethical norms, ethical standards integrate also with the other standards, as we heard from the Court of Cassation, that acknowledged the skills of the lawyer negotiators. A further interesting scenario is the interdisciplinary approach of the professionals participating in the process. And they can bring their contribution and take also a contribution and bring it back to their own scope of work. So we need to make this effort, we need to meet this challenge and grasp the opportunity to wipe the dust away from our desks and change our approach. So with this enthusiastic step forward, I leave the floor back to you. Thank you, Alessandro. I find renegotiation a very interesting topic and very up to date. During the pandemics, we saw that it was required to renegotiate some contracts, especially when renting apartments. Here we see solidarity and collaboration coming to the forefront. These are principles that are very up to date, and unfortunately, they are very often dismissed. Our traditional methods are now inadequate because they tend to terminate contracts rather than renegotiate them. So it is difficult to maintain agreements by changing them. I really share your hints. We need to have creative power to keep the contracts and to continue their life. This is very useful not only in our academic discussions among lawyers, but it also is in the interest of our clients. So I think it's a very important opportunity, not only for lawyers, but also for the clients. But now I have a question for you. The expert negotiator, crisis negotiator, how do you see this player? Can it be effective and efficient, or do you think there are some shortcomings in the legal framework in this respect? I think we need to make a great effort in a step towards individual creativity. There is initial reluctance in those who trained as lawyers, as we did, because we trained as litigators. This cultural shift is crucial to fill the legal gaps that still exist. Let's consider that the Legislative Decree 118 dated 2019 on crisis negotiation provided the opportunity of renegotiating contracts with the intervention of the judge, but it limited this action for contracts that were impacted by the pandemic. In the Cartabia reforms, there was a suggestion to include renegotiation, but it was then rejected. I believe that it's up to professionals dealing with renegotiation in the collaborative practice to do their part and lead parties to share a solution with payment of damages or changes in the contracts to continue with the contracts and the agreements. If I see the financial statements to be approved today, one of the main topics that we are facing are the discounts and to those who lease properties. So we need to explain why you have to renounce your credit and to justify this renounce, because it means the concept of social responsibility, corporate social responsibility. So I prefer that the contract continues rather than enjoying an advantage. But we need to make our contribution as professionals and include collaborative practice clauses in the contracts today, because this is crucial in the conflict resolution. So also in the preemptive stage, we need to contribute. And now we move on to Professor Giulio Ernesti, as an outsider, as a different training. He is a professional in urban planning at the University of Venice. He's an expert in participated design and planning. He also attended training with the International Association of Collaborative Professionals and is speaking today about the co-construction of processes. So Giulio, thank you for your participation.
Grazie. Cercherò di essere il più conciso possibile. Dubito di questa capacità, ma comunque tolto l'orologio per cercare di tenere il tempo. Io ho preparato un ragionamento che vorrei proporvi in 5 punti, se non ricordo male.
5 points to you.
Spero con questo di riuscire a chiarire un po' l'interesse di alcune componenti della cultura del planning per la collaborazione
urban planning culture,
di costruzione, di co-costruzione, di co-creazione e quant'altro. Allora, incomincio e cerco di essere il più veloce possibile. Allora, il mio ragionamento mi riporta alle considerazioni iniziali di Daniela.
So I go back to what Daniela said in the beginning.
Sull'agenda 2030 delle Nazioni Unite del 2015 e sulla stretta correlazione che si stabilisce fra gli obiettivi di quell'agenda e la creatività individuale e collettiva. Questo per una ragione molto, se volete, banale, perché credo che il planning debba collocare, situare la sua azione e riflessione, il rimando continuo fra azione e riflessione, all'interno di queste due cornici. E che questo dipenda dalla grande trasformazione continua e rapida trasformazione della società e dalla continua trasformazione delle lenti di osservazione e di correzione degli aspetti negativi di questa trasformazione continua. Allora, da un lato, cioè intendo dire, misurarsi con la grande intenzione trasformativa di questi 17 obiettivi e delle 179 operazioni che potrebbero essere messe in atto attraverso questi 17 obiettivi. E quindi misurarsi con la complessità del grande compito che sembra additare questa agenda fra molte incomprensioni e molte difficoltà. Molte incomprensioni e molte difficoltà perché le famose 5 P in italiano, già richiamate precedentemente, persona, prosperità, pace, partnership, pianeta, presuppongono un atteggiamento fortemente critico e presuppongono la possibilità di poter costruire un sistema, un modello sociale e economico, se non alternativo, comunque fortemente correttivo di quello attualmente. Ma c'è la sesta parola, la sesta architrave di questo grande processo trasformativo, esplicitamente citata dopo le 5 P dal documento delle Nazioni Unite, che è la collaborazione. Non a caso. Quindi la collaborazione, meglio la collaborazione globale. Quindi la collaborazione, credo per noi pianificatori, diventa una parola chiave in una dimensione macro della nostra possibilità di riflessione, di contributo alla trasformazione collaborazione globale concentrata sui bisogni, e qui sta il progetto in qualche modo eversivo, fortemente correttivo, concentrato sui bisogni dei poveri, delle popolazioni marginali. E quindi, ripeto, un incontro in qualche misura obbligato del planning, visto i temi dei 17 obiettivi e incontro obbligato con la collaborazione, scusate, visto i temi che vengono messi in campo. Direi che il planning è obbligato a misurarsi con un progetto di costruzione di un grande stato di diritto di scala universale. Attraverso appunto, via collaborazione, la garanzia dell'accesso di tutti i cittadini del mondo, di tutti gli abitanti del mondo ai diritti. Allora, questo vuol dire anche che la collaborazione diventa la modalità di trattamento dell'interazione conflittuale fra tutti gli attori presumibilmente coinvolti e presumibilmente conflittuale questo tipo di interazione, visto gli interessi, la posizione in gioco e la radicalità della distanza fra molti di questi interessi. E altra cosa, la collaborazione come una modalità di trasformazione delle istituzioni. E qui altrettanto esplicitamente si dice di costruzione di processi decisionali differenti, e cioè responsabili, aperti a tutti,
that are responsible, open to everyone, and can be
la
participated
collaborazione
in
come uno
and
strumento di apertura alla
So
costruzione, alla
collaboration is an
definizione, alla
instrument to open
sperimentazione di
up
nuove
to
forme di governo.
experiencing and experimenting new
Insomma,
institutions.
mi sembra che questa giornata che tiene insieme quegli obiettivi, la creatività, per noi sia densa di implicazioni e che suggerisco che mentre di ragionare sul ruolo della collaborazione anche per quello che noi facciamo. Secondo punto del mio tentativo di ragionamento. Come dicevo, la collaborazione è quindi il perno della costruzione di un modello socio-economico alternativo. Rispetto soprattutto alle sue principali, in generale le sue esternalità negative. Allora, io le ripercorro brevemente e ne segnalo subito. La polarizzazione sociale ed economica, la disuguaglianza di reddito, di ricchezza e di opportunità, l'insicurezza, la perdita di status, con tutto ciò che comporta in termini di freno alla capacità di investimento, di imprenditorialità, culturale, sociale e quant'altro. Appropriazione della natura, altro grande tema, e soprattutto l'indifferenza del sistema che è ormai nella transizione che stiamo vivendo, l'indifferenza per il consumo della sua rinnovabilità e per la finitezza del pianeta. Poi mi limito solo a insistere su questa questione, sottolineando la scarsa attenzione per la trasformazione in atto della Terra come un attore della storia. Si parla da tempo di geostoria. Un convitato di pietra, come sappiamo tutti, molto rabbioso, imprevedibile, violento, per effetto di processi indotti dalla società in relazione e sottolineerei contemporaneamente la trasformazione dell'umanità in una potenza geologica, cioè in un vettore autodistruttivo. L'ultimo effetto, che considero fondamentale, perché poi è l'avvio del trattamento più ravvicinato al mio sapere, il nodo della democrazia. È un aspetto molto importante. È un aspetto importante perché segnala una contraddizione crescente tra lo sviluppo della democrazia, che tende a contrarsi, e l'affermazione del neoliberismo. E quindi ne va del nostro destino. Questo per dire una cosa, che quindi la democrazia è un aspetto cruciale per la nostra società, per il nostro futuro, e che la collaborazione può costituire un aiuto non indifferente alla conservazione della democrazia. E allora, per chiarire meglio questo punto, mi permetto di recuperare una vecchia conferenza, risale al 1939, di John Dewey, ottantenne allora, in cui presenta un'idea di democrazia che chiama democrazia creativa, e anche per questo mi sembrava consono alla giornata, in cui sostiene che la democrazia è un modo personale di vita individuale. È la creazione continua di individui democratici, interessati all'arricchimento individuale offerto dalla diversità. Il tema della diversità e comunque della pluralità, della dimensione plurale della nostra società sono due questioni fondamentali, quindi molto moderne, no? Molto contemporanee. La democrazia è la creazione di individui disponibili ad imparare gli uni dagli altri, e anche questo mi sembra richiamare un principio della reciprocità, dell'ascolto, delle differenze, del mutuo apprendimento. Infatti dice che sostanzialmente il riconoscimento reciproco del diritto all'autorealizzazione. È un'impresa cooperativa fondata sulla fiducia nell'uomo comune. È il riconoscimento del diritto di tutti ad uguali opportunità. Quindi mi sembra una definizione della democrazia che centra una questione fondamentale, la centralità dell'individuo. Il problema dell'indirizzo eventualmente condiviso, co-costruito degli interessi e delle posizioni individuali verso la costruzione di interessi comuni, di scelte utili per la collettività. E quindi non è l'adesione al vecchio interesse generale o l'adesione a posizioni che si fanno carico di poter interpretare il senso della realtà, di una realtà sempre più complessa. Quarto punto, e quindi mi avvicino alla conclusione, il terreno di cultura ideale di quest'idea della democrazia e di questa correlazione, corresponsabilizzazione, coaiuto fra democrazia e trasformazione della società, probabilmente la città. Allora, io leggo la città come il luogo intanto dove è fondamentale il peso della qualità della vita quotidiana, quindi misuriamo la qualità dello spazio di vita, di interazione, dove forse è più gestibile la problematizzazione del rapporto fra istituzioni, società nelle sue diverse articolazioni, individui e saperi e professioni che sono fondamentali per dare risposta ai nostri problemi. E dove forse è più abbordabile in sostanza la crisi della democrazia rappresentativa e quindi quel clima di sfiducia nelle istituzioni, nella capacità messa fortemente in dubbio di poter rappresentare la pluralità delle popolazioni, dei bisogni, dei desiderata e contemporaneamente di poter dare una rappresentazione a questi bisogni. Quindi una incapacità di prefigurazione di modelli di società. E quindi intendo io la città come un luogo di resistenza, quindi un ruolo di sperimentazione della politica, un ruolo di sperimentazione appunto di nuove forme di democrazia, di ripresa di quei processi di democratizzazione che proprio il neoliberismo, a partire dalla seconda metà degli anni 70, ha messo in discussione e ha progressivamente decostruito. E quindi la città come il luogo appunto della cittadinanza attiva, della rivendicazione dal basso di ascolto, di coinvolgimento nei processi di costruzione di politiche, di scelte, di interesse per l'intera collettività. E quindi dove si ricompone lo scollamento fra rappresentanti e rappresentati, fra chi è legittimato in qualche modo dispone della titolarità delle competenze per progettare lo spazio della vita e dell'interazione delle persone e chi deve subire e non vuole più subire gli effetti di questa titolarità e di queste competenze. E quindi il luogo dove si sperimentano, perché si stanno già sperimentando da tempo, possibilità di costruzione di una cultura amministrativa condivisa, cioè di un'amministrazione condivisa. Di un'amministrazione quindi di istituzioni più in senso lato capaci di favorire capacitazione, di favorire abilitazione degli abitanti, di garantire la possibilità, per dirla con Tamurai, di aspirare a migliorare le proprie condizioni a tutti. E quindi un'istituzione che riconosca la competenza civica. Allora, tutto questo apre al cosiddetto, quello che ho chiamato il paradigma della democratizzazione, cioè è fondamentale oggi riprendere quei processi, e quei processi comportano, come in generale tutto quello che ho cercato di dire fino a quel momento, di tornare a coltivare il diritto alla città. Forse un termine abusato, perché il fevero povero è stato ripreso continuamente negli ultimi anni. E anche io forse rientro in quelli che abusano di queste sue teorie che risalgono al 1967, ma sempre attuali, no? E contemporaneamente il diritto al conflitto. Ecco, questo mi interessava sottolineare, cioè pensare al conflitto come a una risorsa e non come qualcosa di negativo. Come un diritto sia degli individui che della collettività, e soprattutto come una modalità che impedisce la degenerazione del conflitto nell'ostilità. Ma per fare questo ha bisogno di, io credo, un approccio collaborativo. Cioè ha bisogno della collaborazione come un approccio capace di trasformare la disfunzionalità dell'avversarialità nella curiosità necessaria per garantire un'interazione creativa. E quindi ha bisogno della collaborazione come, direi, una forma di superamento di quella che io definirei una sorta di pigrizia intellettuale e morale delle posizioni, e quindi dell'accomodamento, del comfort che voi avete già citato. E quindi la collaborazione è intesa piuttosto come forma di empowerment, e quindi la collaborazione come quel meccanismo, quel processo, quella pratica, quel costrutto, più esattamente, capace di avvicinare e di dare una sorta di compito uguale, simile, tanto alle istituzioni quanto alla società civile. Allora, tutto questo io credo che sia fondamentale per il mio sapere, e chiudo. Perché? Perché il mio sapere è in trasformazione, e sta faticosamente e con anche orgoglio, e quindi anche forse qualche difficoltà nell'abbandonare alcune posizioni precedenti, alcune tradizioni, se vogliamo, molto ricche, soprattutto dal punto di vista dell'impegno ideologico, ma dell'impegno morale, di fronte a quelli che tutti conosciamo essere stati nell'arco del secondo dopoguerra i disastri e profonde trasformazioni e alterazioni della qualità delle nostre città e in generale dell'ambiente urbano e non solo urbano. Allora si sta trasformando da un sapere connotato da una propensione tecnocratica, un sapere che si è costituito e si è legittimato, autolegittimato come un sapere, il braccio operativo delle istituzioni, quindi del potere, del pubblico più in generale, senza scomodare il potere, e dell'interesse generale che ogni pubblico nel corso della storia definisce come tale, quindi un sapere, come dire, titolare del trattamento della complessità dell'organismo urbano, della società urbana, a un sapere via via sempre più riflessivo, cioè capace di riflettere nel corso, potremmo dire, dell'azione. Un sapere dialogico, un sapere che abilita, un sapere esplorativo, argomentativo, empatico, talvolta maieutico, un sapere che procede per approssimazione, un sapere che procede per riformulazioni continue, che costruisce storie, che storicizza i processi e quindi è in grado anche di costruire storia nuova. Storicizzando appunto la transizione come un'operazione necessaria di comprensione della complessità. Un sapere che si autolimita, che limita la propria vocazione demiurgica, cioè l'idea di poter dire a tutti come vivere, dove vivere, e un sapere che abilita, questa è la conclusione direi, abilita la gente comune al progetto. Cioè un sapere che è in grado di mettere all'opera la capacità di visioning della gente comune, di tutti i cittadini. E pensate solo a quale potenza di figurazione potrebbe essere messa in moto sollecitando queste capacità e quindi demistificando, desacralizzando le competenze tecniche del sapere, mettendolo a disposizione veramente come un elemento di produzione di immagini. E quindi ancora una volta il ritorno all'esplorazione del possibile. Ultima conclusione. Ho cercato di mettere in evidenza l'importanza della collaborazione. Ho cercato di eseminarla a una macro scala e a una micro scala nel contesto praticabile della società, della società umana, per le motivazioni che ho detto. La conclusione è che la collaborazione non è semplicemente un modo di stare diversamente insieme. Lo è nella misura in cui ci si appropria di una formazione ad hoc, nella misura in cui ci si appropria di tecniche di comunicazione, tecniche di costruzione del discorso su quelle ipotesi di esplorazione delle possibilità. L'ultima conclusione, e in questo credo di riprendere quanto ha detto Alessandro, Daniele, ma quanto mi è sembrato di cogliere corressa in tutte le comunicazioni che mi hanno preceduto, cioè che la collaborazione è probabilmente un punto fondamentale per ridefinire il ruolo e quindi il contributo delle professioni e quindi in una certa misura incidere su quei processi cosiddetti di disintermediazione che sembrerebbero caratterizzare la società odierna. E quindi uno strumento fondamentale per la rilegittimazione delle professioni all'interno della società. Grazie.
Giulio, thank you very much because you shared many hints and you cancelled every doubt on why an urban planner is here to talk about collaboration. Your fil rouge was very clear and you contributed to widen our view. So I would like to ask you a question, but I would like to still 5 more minutes, or shall we interrupt? Can we have 5 more minutes? Talking about the territory and the urban planning, there are many interventions that we can make on the territory. As we need to have many administration and institution coming in when dealing with planning and communication in general. Collaborative practice. Can collaborative practice find place in the relationship between public institutions and the private? Or do you think that is too much to ask?
No, assolutamente, non la vedo per nulla come una buttata. Anzi,
I don't think it's too much
è un ottimo spunto che riporta forse il mio discorso un po' troppo aereo alla dura realtà, perché l'urbanistica poi appunto si fa attraverso regole, norme, si fa attraverso appunto vincoli che sono una forma di regolamentazione, di normazione. Ecco, io rispetto a questo non ho nessun rilievo negativo, cioè sul fatto che esistano che siano fondamentali o che sia fondamentale la presenza di norme, di regole e di una regolamentazione in grado di indirizzare lo sviluppo in un determinato senso, che sia in grado quindi anche di conservare certi sistemi di valori. Non metto in discussione questo, però vorrei semplicemente mettere in evidenza il fatto che molte di queste regole e norme sono nate in un determinato periodo, non sempre corrispondono non tanto alla necessità di salvaguardare certi beni, quanto al significato di quei beni e quindi quanto al significato della trasformazione possibile delle regole. Non so se sono stato chiaro, quindi l'eccesso di regolamentazione, questa superfetazione, no? Con regole, appunto come dicevi tu, di vincoli, ha prodotto una sorta di processo quasi di devalorizzazione dell'importanza della regola, perché non è più pertinente, no? Possiamo pensare all'esproprio, che è nato per limitare la speculazione e che poi è diventato anche strumento di speculazione. Parliamo del rapporto pubblico e privato, appunto, come mi sembrava tu volessi richiamare, no? Anche, che è fondamentale, c'è poco da fare, però questo rapporto pubblico-privato è come se fosse gestito burocraticamente nel senso negativo del termine. Cioè senza attenzione alla complessità, allo spessore delle cose. È questo che intendevo dire. E credo quindi che la collaborazione, intesa come quel metro di comportamento comune fra le parti, fra i soggetti pubblici, privati, portatori di interessi, fra loro contrastanti, possa essere un metodo di scusami e poi chiudo, come un metodo opportuno, perché aperto, perché disponibile di rivisitazione di questo sistema. Non so se ho risposto alla tua domanda.
I hope I answered the question. You were very clear. You provided a lot of interesting hints and inputs and insights. So I don't think that starting a discussion at 7:20 is possible, but this is a way to continue talking about the collaborative practice and investigate this subject. We already talked with the speakers, and the International Chamber of Genoa is open to your participation. I would like to thank all the participants, all the speakers who participated. I treasure all the insights that came from you, and I believe that our future is molded by the way we can rethink about our priorities, our approach, and we can revise also our tools So to cope with dispute and litigation in a different way. We need a more fruitful dialogue. My last remark before concluding, yesterday morning, I was writing some reflections to share to you, and my 5-year-old daughter was going around the house singing a song that said, "Take me by your hands, because you go faster alone, but you go further together." And I thought, what a curious coincidence, because I was reflecting about collaboration, and I thought that this little song was a really good way to conclude. Thank you for your participation, and I hope to see you again to our next
Posso
event.
ringraziarvi tutti anche per una ragione particolare, compreso Marco, ovviamente, che è ricomparso, ma volevo ringraziarvi perché seguendo voi nella costruzione di questo seminario ho capito l'importanza proprio non solo della formazione, ma della condivisione continua, processuale, se mi consentite il termine, di questo terreno comune. E quindi l'idea di un apprendimento continuo, perché si parla di apprendimento continuo rispetto al mondo esterno, io l'ho sollecitato nel mondo esterno, ma i primi ad apprendere qualcosa di nuovo, misurandosi, sperimentandosi con la realtà, è un'altra cosa.
Experiencing and experimenting with the reality. Thank you for this wise way of closing.
Ho letto il tuo libro, il vostro libro.
Everybody. We tried to answer to questions in the chat line so that we could provide an answer, but you find our email addresses on the internet, so we are at your disposal for further clarifications. I'm not as multitasking as you are. I couldn't even open the chat, but thank you, Maurizio.
Grazie a tutti, ciao, un abbraccio.
Thank you.
A Genova.
A Genova, ve l'ho detto, siete ben accetti.
Io poi sono libero, quindi mi godo Genova.
Poi si avvicina l'estate. Ciao a tutti.
Ciao a tutti, grazie.